Do you ever feel like the whole world is going to hell in a handbasket? In 2015, a friend said to me, Andrew, everyone our age that I know is either depressed, suicidal, or an alcoholic. And little did I know, just a few years later, I'd go down my own dark spiral, depressed out of my mind about the state of the world. But over time, I came to realize that not only is the situation not as bad as I once thought, but quite the opposite. The times we live in probably have the most potential out of any time in human history. And if we just play our cards right, we can have an unbelievably exciting future ahead of us. Now, before you crucify me, just hear me out. Yes, I know that the cost of living is skyrocketing while wages are staying stagnant. Yes, I know that by 2030, corporations might own 40% of single family homes. Yes, I know that the American healthcare system is about as efficient as the American government. And yes, I know that social media companies have a perfected art of making young people anxious, depressed, and constantly measuring yourself up to others. And yes, I know that Nickelback keeps putting out albums that no one asked for. Yet, despite all of that, the decades since World War II have objectively been the best of the 300,000 years modern humanity has been on the scene. And I don't want to downplay any of our current suffering, but I think it's important that we start off by putting our present experience in context of all of human history, because these are rhetorical questions, but how many of you have had siblings who died before the age of 5? How many of you have had parents that died before the age of 35? How many people do you know who died in childbirth, in combat, in a natural disaster, from starvation, from an easily treatable disease? For most of us, the answer to all of those is zero, probably none. And just since the year 1900, a combination of vaccines, sanitation, and increased nutrition have decimated disease by over 95%. Things like the weather forecast system have decreased deaths from natural disasters by about 75%. The number of humans living in extreme poverty has decreased by 60%. Global life expectancy has more than doubled, and infant mortality has dropped 90%. The percentage of women being educated globally has skyrocketed. Like, this is all since the year 1900. And also in the West, we now even treat our enemies with a degree of respect that's unprecedented in human history, because enslaving enemies, raping enemies, torturing enemies of war used to be the norm. And I'm not naive, I know that these things still happen in the West, but by and large, if you do them now, you'll find yourself in a human rights violation court. And not only have all these terrible things taken a nosedive, but our quality of life and luxury have exponentially increased. You can walk into a Walmart and have a wider access to food and products than any emperor ever had at any point in history. Your home has temperature control in every season, and you have reliable plumbing inside that most of you used to take a hot shower this morning, or at least I hope you did. You can hop into a metal chariot that's also temperature controlled and be somewhere 30 times faster than you could by horse. And you can press a few buttons on a tiny box on your hand and talk to anyone in the world while seeing their face in real time. And also at your fingertips, you have a data bank that you can ask any question that has 1,000,000,000 times more information than any encyclopedia had just 30 years ago. Companies like Neuralink are on track to make the blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear, and I'm totally willing to admit the potential dystopian nature of Meta's Ray-Ban glasses, but on the bright side, they can do audio translation in real time. Like, think of the positive effects the world could get out of the language barrier collapsing. So when adults have this defeatist attitude and rhetoric of, like the world is on fire, things are worse than they've ever been, they're not only being irresponsibly misleading on a conspiracy theory level, but they're speaking from a place of religious extremism that is not even close to being based in reality. Like, make a mental note to lump these people in the same category as flat earthers and Holocaust deniers. Because you have to keep in mind how skewed your actual perspective of the world is, because the media is constantly showing you the absolute worst thing that's happening in the whole world 24/7, and hardly ever airing all of the inspiring and revolutionary things that people are doing. Because all of these issues were made better because an individual sees a problem, gets creative, and finds a way to solve it. Prime example is that just 100 years ago, the greatest threat facing humanity was thought to be overpopulation, because many experts predicted humanity would face mass starvation to the point of near extinction by the year 2000. But the year 2000 comes, and not only were we thriving as a species, but we were actually overfed, and we needed plans to help us lose calories, because calories used to be all the rage. Cavemen used to tell their buddies, like, hey, you gotta try this thing called potatoes. They've each got 150 calories. And now we have trillion-dollar industries that are based on breaking our addiction to potato chips and French fries. We even pay money to expend calories and do manual labor through lifting heavy metal objects. And all of this has happened because of the advancements in farming and food technology and the combine harvester and things that we could have never dreamed of 200 years ago. And now, ironically enough, one of the greatest threats facing humanity is population collapse. Most countries soon won't have enough kids to sustain their economies. And I see a lot of memes about population collapse that are like, oh, boo-hoo, corporations won't have enough human slaves to work for them. But that's a gross oversimplification and actually kind of the opposite of the situation. Because think of it this way, like say you didn't want to be a corporate slave, so you started your own small Italian restaurant. If the economic pool of potential customers is cut by 30%, your potential earnings are cut by 30%, and you no longer have the capital to operate your business, so you end up having to be a chef for corporations like Olive Garden that can survive by earning pennies on the dollar. And when population collapse happens, countries usually turn to immigration to balance things out, but that won't be a viable solution because population collapse is happening in most countries, so we've all got the same problem. But guess what? We'll find a way, like we always have, because it's a crime how little we're taught about just how innovative and resilient humans are. We can't even imagine all the ways AI will revolutionize the world and probably take over a lot of our jobs, so the issue of population collapse might not hit our economies so hard with AI. And I know what you're thinking, that's all great, but what about the problems I'm facing right now? Well, let's get into some of those. Like the cost of living. Not gonna lie, this one is probably the bleakest, but that's why I wanted to start with it. Exhibit A. It's this meme saying boomers telling you to stop complaining and work harder after selling their house for $3 million, which they bought for 2 raspberries and a firm handshake. Now, I could show you a bunch of depressing charts about how little purchasing power your salary has compared to a salary in 1980, but the point is that wages suck and something has to change. But first, it's important to keep in mind that even though this is one of the few things that actually is regressing from where we were at a few decades ago, you've really just gone from being in the top 0.1% of richest people who've ever lived to now being in the top 0.2%. So in the grand scheme of things, we can collectively cry ourselves a river. But still, I get it. It sucks, especially when we have to compare ourselves to our parents' unprecedented streak of financial abundance. And the obvious solution to this is that CEOs should stop pretending it's 1990 and pay their employees modern-day wages, and we should hope for and call for them to step up, but based on track record, hinging your future on the goodwill of a CEO is about as good of an idea as betting your house that the Dolphins will win the Super Bowl. For anyone who knows me, yes, I did have to Google worst football teams for that joke because I know absolutely nothing about football. But here's what makes me hopeful. Businesses are based on employees and consumers, and if there's something negatively impacting that system, it will eventually cause enough problems that management has to address it because their ultimate interest is how profitable they're being. Disgruntled employees lead to less productivity, which leads to higher employee demands, strikes, lawsuit, and changes. And we saw this take place en masse after the pandemic. People got used to a work from home, or at least hybrid situation. So when a lot of employers eventually said, everyone has to return to the office 40 hours a week, a lot of people just said, nah, I'm good. I'll just quit and find a job that does allow for hybrid. Because millennials and younger have this protest in us, and it's honestly the thing that I love most and least about us, that we're pretty annoying about some things. Because on one hand, we protest by blocking traffic and throwing soup on paintings and other idiotic things. But on the other hand, we refuse to do things that don't make sense. And I think that's great. We're willing to say, no, I'm not going to break my back for 40 hours a week just to hardly be able to pay rent in this decaying city that's crime-ridden. Like, I'd rather just work less for a different company that offers hybrid and rent somewhere cheaper on the outskirts and live a well-balanced life. And markets will and are responding to this. Even the housing market has to crash or change eventually if no one can afford the houses, because life is full of cycles and economies are part of that circle, so you just gotta ride the wave for a bit longer. And I know that's not fair, and I am an optimist, but I'm also a realist. They're all the what ifs. What if that CEO or that president fixes the problem? But as the saying goes, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, it'd be Christmas all year round. So some of the best advice I can give you is that in the meantime, you may just have to brace for a bit of an endurance game and hope for the best and plan for the worst and work smarter, not harder, to climb to a place of economic stability. Because there are so many resources online to help you become financially literate, and you don't even have to pay for those sketchy Tai Lopez courses anymore because people will share this guidance for free. And I'll put some links below to some great resources. Moving on to the next topic that you probably consider to be an existential threat to civilization: climate. First off, climate change is obviously a major issue that is impacted by fossil fuels, but the scare tactics a lot of people use are misleading to the point that they're just outright lies. Like, you see these things that say, in 50 years, 100 million people will have died from climate-related disasters, but a lot of these predictions are based on studies worst possible scenarios, not likely realities. And the death toll numbers are based on the idea that you just stay in your house and let the like rising sea level sweep you away, or that you're just going to chill at home while a raging wildfire consumes you. We just had the LA fires, one of the worst fires we've ever had on record in the US, and 30 people died. Obviously, 30 people is still too much, but if we're going off some of these climate disaster models, we would have counted the 150,000 displaced people as dead instead, but that's not obviously how these things work, because the impact of natural disasters depends significantly on how we approach them. So we can clear brush to mitigate the effects of wildfire, we can build seawalls, we can use building materials that withstand earthquakes, and yes, of course, we can and should also pursue cleaner forms of energy, like nuclear fusion. This technology is on the rise and could potentially solve the energy crisis forever, and this is probably the single most exciting thing on humanity's horizon. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is the master of explaining complex scientific things to dumb everyday people like me, has talked about how we're on the cusp of creating nuclear energy where we get more energy out than we put in, which he calls the Holy Grail. So, instead of ranting on Facebook through your infinite information box about how awful the world is from the comfort of your apartment that probably has amenities a medieval king couldn't even dream of, instead of doing that, you could make yourself into the missing link that pushes this technology over a pivotal crux to help create infinite clean energy for mankind. So that's the energy front. Then on the environmental front, the ocean cleanup was created by a kid when he was like 19, and now it's removing over 35 million pounds of trash from the ocean. Another person who could be you, a person who solves problems instead of complaining about them. These are the people who are actually doing things, whereas government environmental programs are usually just doing theater. Most climate policies aren't based on what works, but what makes politicians look good to their party and constituents. Bjorn Lomborg has a great book called False Alarm: How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillion, Hurts the Poor, and Fails to Fix the Planet. And that's a great summary of how most of this goes. Real environmentalists with real solutions get pushed to the wayside for egotistical politicians with ideas that sound good on a news segment but don't actually bring about sustainable change. So beware of the fearmongers. When I see climate extremists, it reminds me of the fire and brimstone television preachers from the 90s, and these just aren't the influences you want in your life. Thomas Sowell said, "There are no solutions, only compromises," because everything in life is give and take, and the more you realize this, the less you'll be susceptible to extremism on any topic, because you know that everything is about weighing the pros and cons and not imagining you'll find some pie-in-the-sky solution that only has good effects, because big oil contributes to climate change, and that is bad, don't mishear me, but wind turbines kill birds and solar grids are so wildly unreliable that countries that go heavily monopoly on them, like Germany, end up having to import 60% of their energy from Russian fossil fuels. And those aren't reasons to not pursue clean energy, but those kinds of facts need to be a part of the equation when we approach these things. And we can also critique companies like Monsanto, but they provided a great compromise. Because on one hand, you have questionable methods and genetic modification and all that, but on the other hand, global starvation has basically become a non-issue. So there are pros and cons to everything, and the sooner we can all be adults and realize that that's how the world works, the sooner we'll find better and better compromises. And the point is, climate change is a major issue, but one that can definitely be adapted to. Moving on, there's no shortage of news stories on the potential threats of AI, but the revolutionary positives hardly ever get put on air. For example, using AI, health databases are being built that will not just be able to diagnose very specific conditions and diseases, but will be able to give you a hyper-personalized treatment plan that works symbiotically with your genetics specifically and your health history, because this will catch things like cancer exponentially sooner and will treat them in an exponentially more precise way. Or self-driving cars with AI technology. That's freaky, right? You know what else is freaky? 90% of people who are on the roads. Because my conspiracy theory of choice is that there's some kind of underground black market for people to get driver's licenses, because there is no way most of these people out here have passed a driving exam. But what you might not know is that self-driving cars could lower auto mortality rates to near zero. Like if I have to pick between a super intelligent robot driver and the average driver on the highway, I'll pick the robot every time. Because of course every now and then you'll have a self-driving car malfunction and someone will die, but the death rates will just be orders of magnitude lower. Also, AI is coming for a lot of jobs, and that's probably a good thing. There's a whole slew of occupations like truck drivers and office workers and cashiers and graphic designers that will become somewhat irrelevant, which in theory will force a lot of countries to institute something like universal basic income, and then your job can become just doing things that you actually enjoy. Like if you love truck driving still, you can still drive your truck across the country on your own time. If you love graphic design, you can make personal projects that are meaningful to you instead of creating a new Coca-Cola display ad for Target. Sam Altman, the CEO of one of the biggest AI companies in the world, has done the biggest study on universal basic income exactly because they know where all this is going necessarily. And if AI ever does become a problem, they'll hopefully see that I spoke highly of them in this video and they might spare me. And real quick, I'm going to rapid fire some people throughout history who just saw a massive problem, got creative, and solved it. Alexander Fleming saw the mass casualties of World War I and invented penicillin, which has now saved an estimated 500 million lives. Or Johannes Gutenberg wanted to diffuse the informational gatekeeping of governments and state churches, so he invented the printing press to bring information to the average person. Or Malala Yousafzai, I think is how you say it, believed that it's unacceptable that 130 million girls are denied education because of religious or cultural views. So her work has given just countless girls the opportunity to go to school, and she became the youngest ever Nobel Peace Prize laureate, whatever you say it. Hiram Moore decided that of all the things we could die of, no one deserved to die of starvation, and he invented the combine harvester, which could do the work of 60 men. Earl Haas thought it was unacceptable how many women had entirely preventable infections, so he patented the tampon and sold it to Gertrude Tindrick, who made each tampon with her sewing machine at home and went on to find Tampax. Daryl Davis, an African American, wanted to prove to KKK members that their preconceived notions of black people were wrong, so he did the absolutely absurd and began befriending Klan members, which led to over 200 of them giving up their robes. That's just one of the coolest stories ever. All these people are problem solvers, not complainers, and what bothers me most about complainers and pessimists is that they don't seem to realize how much of a scandalous gift this life and this world are. First off, we are stardust that's been touched by lightning or God or whatever you want to call it, and now we have complex thought and emotions, and as far as we know, we're the only beings in the universe who experience this level of consciousness and love and awareness, because there are a trillion observable galaxies, and we still haven't found anything else like the human experience, so don't ever forget that. Edgar Mitchell once said about his trip to the moon, You develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics look so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of his neck, drag him 250,000 miles out, and say, "Look at that, you son of a bitch." So don't let politicians or pop stars drag you down to their level and make you think we're anything less than impossibly extraordinary and that all of this is entirely worth fighting for. And when you're feeling bad about your life or the world, the first thing to do is just zoom out and realize how much of a goddamn miracle all of this is, that you are. Because I want to be surrounded by innovators and problem solvers, not by doom scrolling Redditors who've accepted an apocalyptic fate. And also, I don't want to give up or live in a future where most people have given up, because our mindset is what shapes the future, and it can very much be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if enough people believe that our future is going to suck, then our future probably will suck because we didn't take the steps to avoid that sucky future. Because our two options are to either say, "This is all too much to overcome, my life is just an unjust tragedy, I guess I'm just gonna, flip the bird to the wind and eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die." Or our other option is to say, "Bring it on. Let's do it." We've had a lot bigger issues as a species to overcome in the past, and we overcame them with far less brain power and far fewer resources than we have today, because you are the future. You will be the ones running businesses, reforming education, cracking the energy crisis, making headlines. Life is a miracle. And you know what else is a miracle? These guys. These are my kids, and I refuse to give into cynicism and negativity and let them inherit a world that's anything less than magical, because the next generation deserves our optimism and innovation. We owe it to them, we owe it to ourselves, and whether or not we have a bright future ahead of us is entirely in our hands. Thanks for watching. If you found this worthwhile, feel free to share this video with family or friends, and you can request for me to come speak at your school or college if you want, because this is a message I really believe in and want to spread. So thanks.